TJ? Why didn't you call?
I wanted to believe me, but I couldn't. I mean, I really fell on my ass out there. I made so many mistakes.
And you know what the worst part of all is? I never learned to read!
Welcome to Random Movie Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be talking about My Bloody Valentine. So in keeping in tradition with this channel, whenever there's a month that has a major holiday in it, I'd like to talk about a movie that is related or adjacent to that holiday. And since I'm not a big Valentine's Day guy, I know a lot of people who aren't really into Valentine's Day, why not watch a wonderful, sleazy, hateful, but very cheesy and easy to watch slasher movie that is also quite Canadian.
I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry.
It's funny, I wouldn't really consider myself to be like the biggest slasher movie fan. There are, of course, slasher movies that I am a big fan of. I'm a fan of the Friday the 13th series. I'm a big fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street series. And of course, one of my favorite horror movies ever is the original Halloween. But there's also just a ton of really bad, lame, forgettable, and worst of all, very boring slasher movies. So I'm quite picky when it comes to the genre. But I have talked about numerous slasher movies on this channel already. I've talked about Halloween 4. I've talked about Thanksgiving, the Eli Roth movie. I Know What You Did Last Summer, an Urban Legend. Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives, the best Friday the 13th movie. And I've also ranked all of the Scream movies. So I've talked quite a bit about slasher movies. And for anyone interested in seeing any of those videos, I'll make sure to put them in the description below. But My Bloody Valentine came out in the biggest year for slasher movies, and that is 1981. That was the year for slasher movies. I was looking up how many slasher movies came out in 1981. Roughly 40 plus, at least, which is crazy. All in the same year. It was just the height of that genre's popularity. And we all know that the slasher movie blueprint was really created by John Carpenter with Halloween. Of course, there were slasher movies before then. There was Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There was Black Christmas. And of course, there was a whole Italian giallo films, which was definitely a precursor to what we would see in the 80s in terms of the slasher genre. But it was really John Carpenter that laid out the blueprint that, okay, this is what a slasher movie is. It is a intimidating, big, masked villain that is going after teenagers, typically, who are promiscuous and who are smoking dope, smoking the reefer.
Are you high? What? No, I'm not high.
You are high as a fucking kite!
Doing bad things and just killing them for really no reason. And then Friday the 13th came in, and they're like, okay, we'll take that same formula, but we'll put it in a summer camp. And then that movie was so fucking successful, and it made so much money off such a small budget that just these hundreds of slasher movies came in right after that to capitalize on the popularity of the genre. It's like, hey, we can make these movies for really cheap, really inexpensive, and we can get a big return in terms of box office profits as a result. In 1981 was that year where, you know, all of these filmmakers and producers, they wanted in on that cash cow. In 1981, you had, you know, Halloween 2 came out in 81, Friday the 13th Part 2 came out in 81, and then just a million other slasher movies. And then one of the other ones that came out in 1981 was My Bloody Valentine. And My Bloody Valentine is often seen as being one of the more memorable and more likable, enjoyable movies that came out around this time. Because like I said, there's so many slasher movies out there, especially during this time, and a lot of them aren't very good. I haven't seen all of them, but My Bloody Valentine was one that always stuck out to me because it was an interesting setting. Valentine's Day was kind of an interesting holiday choice to put a slasher movie around. You're not going after teenagers, you're going after blue-collar mining workers because it takes place in a small mining town, but they act like teenagers anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And you have a killer that looks really cool in the mining outfit. And then, of course, there's a movie that came out just about 5 months after this called The Prowler, where the killer looks almost exactly like the miner in My Bloody Valentine. But The Prowler is super fucking boring, but has amazing kills in it. My Bloody Valentine is just a much, much better movie. The plot of the movie, I mean, like pretty much every slasher movie, is very, very straightforward. We find out that in this small town, there's this urban legend of a miner getting trapped down in the mines by the name of Harry Warden. It was 20 years ago, according to the crazy old man in this movie.
I know what I'm talking about. I'm telling you now. This town is accursed. No, it started 20 years ago.
Every slasher movie needs that crazy old man that's trying to warn the young folk that they never listen to. They set that up in Friday the 13th.
It's got a death curse.
It was during the traditional Valentine's Day dance that Harry Warden got trapped in the mine, went crazy, became a cannibal, went to a mental asylum, and then he escaped to get revenge on the town for putting him in that situation, killing people crazily, and now it created this urban legend in this town. And our three core characters are TJ, Sarah, and Axel. Yes, I had to look that up on my phone because, like every slasher movie ever, all of these characters are pretty much completely disposable and very forgettable and have little to no personality traits that distinguish them that well from each other. There is a love triangle between these three characters, TJ being kind of the main character, and something that kind of sets this movie apart from most other slasher movies is that it's not a final girl, it's a final dude. He tried to leave the town, tried to become someone big, someone important, someone successful. The movie's quite vague about it. Didn't work out. He comes back to the town where his girlfriend, who he left at the time, is dating one of his friends, Axel, who is a fellow miner. And so that's kind of like the internal tension that's happening within the movie. But of course, the movie is really about the supposed Harry Warden coming back to the town 20 years to the day because the town decided to do, we're going to bring back the Valentine's Day dance. We stopped doing it after that tragedy, but we're going to do it again. And then, of course, that's when people start getting heart-shaped boxes that you think are chocolates, but there's a human heart inside. And Harry Warden's going to pick off these miners and anyone who gets in his way one by one because of revenge. Once again, not the most original premise in the world, but what makes this movie enjoyable for me is the fact that aesthetically, it is quite different from most other slasher movies around this time. I love the look of the miner. That's such a badass, intimidating looking costume for a slasher villain. This movie is now known for having some of the more gruesome kills during this time, but at the time of the film's release, all of the kills were pretty much cut out, which is pretty crazy. Watching this movie, I was like, wow, these are really good kills. But when you watch the unrated cut of this movie, you know when they bring in a cut scene because the color timing and the grain is just so significant from the other scenes. You're like, okay, you're clearly watching a scene that was cut out originally, but they brought back some of the more gruesome stuff. It's not terribly gruesome by today's standards, but as far as 1981 goes, it's like, oh, there's some pretty fun creative kills. That's one of the reasons why I think this movie has gone on to have a cult following because they re-released it in 2009 around the time the remake came out. I've never seen the remake, but apparently it sucks. That's not surprising. So the movie has some fun creative kills. It has a cool looking villain, and I just think the setting is really interesting and different from most other 80s slasher during this time. I think the idea of being trapped in a mine that's so like dark and claustrophobic and dirty, and it's like a maze down there. It's easy to get lost. It's like that's a really scary setting for a slasher movie, and that's where like the real tension in the horror takes place during that entire climax, and it's really genuinely effective in terms of creating tension, in terms of its dreary, foreboding atmosphere. You get some creative kills. And then, of course, we find out, because this is a slasher movie that's in the vein of a Friday the 13th slasher, meaning in the first Friday the 13th, we don't know who the killer is. It's meant to be kind of a whodunit. And there's a whole subgenre of slashers where they're based around, there's a mysterious killer, but who is he? Where in Halloween, that's not really a factor. We know it's Michael Myers, and, you know, there's no whodunit aspect to it. That's something that movies after Halloween would kind of adopt, that whodunit style of slasher movies. The whole time you're watching the movie, we're told that it's Harry Warden who's coming back. And it's him, it's nobody else. But then we find out in a very, very obvious and predictable twist that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense if you think about it. Axel, the person in the love triangle, very predictably the killer, and then we find out at the tail end of the movie, well, why is he the killer? That doesn't really make any sense, because the movie doesn't do any proper foreshadowing as to why this particular character would be a crazy killer. It's like, well, why is he the killer at all? That doesn't make sense. And then, of course, they very lazily, from a narrative standpoint, just throw out the tail end, oh, well, when Harry Warden did his killing spree 20 years ago, one of the people that died was Axel's father. He saw it as a kid. There's this, it makes me laugh because it's so crude, where he's like stabbing him with the pickaxe. He takes out the heart and the blood sprays all over the little kid's face, and it shows him being traumatized in a way that's really, it shouldn't be funny, but it came off as quite comical because it was so shoehorned in at the tail end. And then there are two characters, the father of TJ and the sheriff character, who are trying to solve this mystery throughout the film. They're like, oh yeah, that's right, Axel, his dad was killed by Harry Warden. It's like, well, that would have been really useful information earlier, but I guess that would have been too obvious. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. You watch this movie for its atmosphere. You watch it for its creative kills and the fact that it's in a different setting than most other slasher movies. It's not a great movie by any means, but it's one that does stand out from other 1981 slasher movies, and one that I enjoy watching because I like the aesthetic of the movie. I like that the movie is pretty well paced. The movie does a good job of doing horror moments and then slowing it down, and then doing another horror moment and then slowing it down. There's never a moment in the movie where I feel like it's overstaying its welcome or it's too much of a slog. The movie is well paced, creative kills, a really kind of wild ending that ends with a super awesome song, by the way.
Once every year, as the 14th draws near, there's a hush all over the town. Or the legend they say on a Valentine's Day.
But anyway, guys, that's my thoughts on My Bloody Valentine. This is one that I have a soft spot for. I would definitely consider this to be a fun, guilty pleasure, low-budget, sleazy slasher movie that I enjoy. As someone who is very picky about most slasher movies, this one is definitely, if you will, a cut above a lot of other ones around this time. But I want to hear from you guys. What are your thoughts on this movie? What are some of your favorite slasher movies that came out in 1981? What are some of your favorite holiday-themed slasher movies? Mention in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys for watching.